Thank you for downloading this episode of the Nerdball Podcast. I'm your fearless host, Lorenzo Melcher, down in my basement, awaiting nothing because the interview is over, but the illusion is that it hasn't started yet. So this run into this is now my second episode of the new year. I'm still having fun, guys. I say it every time, and thank you all for downloading, listening to this podcast, commenting on things. It's great, and I'm having a lot of fun. The YouTube has picked up, which is reflected in the audio only downloads. So I don't know if more people are coming to it or just taking it in a different way. But either way, a lot more views on the podcast. I got up to, I think, 140 subscribers now. So it's exciting. It's cool. And I'm going to keep doing it as long as I have people to talk to, which is, there's a lot of people. I think there's like 7 billion people on this planet. So I have a lot of people to choose from. Now, if they want to come on here, great. Again, thanks to all of you for always being here, listening and watching the podcast. The episode today, a little bit different than what I normally do. Normally I sit down and interview people about their life, but this episode was a specific episode. I interviewed, excuse me, Kelly Weinersmith about the book her and her husband Zach wrote called A City on Mars. So it was just about that, and it was great. It was a good book for me because I'm terrified of space and space travel, and this book said, yeah, here's some possibilities and things we can do. Here's also things that will probably make it very difficult. It's an hour-long interview. We just scratched the surface on the book. I recommend getting the book. I listened to it on Audible. City on Mars by Kelly and Zach Weinersmith. Check it out. It's great. It has an audio snob. The audio, listening to it was great too. And so please check that out. And thank you for listening to the episode.
Hello, I'm Kelly Weinersmith, and this is the Nerdball Podcast. This is the Nerdball Podcast with Lorenzo Melcher.
Great, Kelly. Thanks for coming back on the podcast. I meant to look up the last episode you were on, and then I forgot. So it was a while ago. We talked about bugs. It was cool. I was very interested, but you're coming on this time for a different reason. And just to get it out there, when I asked you to come on the podcast, I had not read or listened to the book yet. And then when you said yes, I'm like, all right, well, I better do this. So I crammed the past 2 days.
Whoa.
I listened at 2 times speed, which is not a new thing to me. I listen to podcasts at 2 times speed all the time. So my ears are pretty adapt to that kind of stuff. But the book, A City on Mars, that you and your husband wrote, is why you're on here. And again, I told you before we started recording, but thank you for agreeing to come on the podcast. It's really cool. I'm excited to talk about this because
Thanks,
I think
I had so much fun last time. I was excited you asked me to come back.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you. I think we talked a little bit about space travel the first time, just a tiny bit, and I told you how terrifying it is to me. I don't even like flying. Yeah, I don't even like flying in airplanes. So this book, just to give overall for me, like, it was cool because since I don't like space travel, the things you guys talked about was like, well, here's why it wouldn't work, and here's this, and here's that. I was like, yes, thank you. I feel like whenever people talk about traveling to the moon or Mars or wherever, they're like, yeah, this is going to be wonderful. This is how it happens. But you guys like took a good approach to say like, yeah, possibly, but here's also some things that aren't going to work.
Yeah, it might be awful. And it was, so my husband and I started off as people who were really excited about the idea of going to space and then became people who weren't. I mean, I don't think either one of us would have volunteered to be one of the first people to go back to the moon or anything. Like we're wimps. We don't want to blow up in a rocket, but we are sci-fi geeks. And after writing our first book together, we felt like, oh my gosh, settlements, we could like maybe do this in the next couple decades. And the more research we did, the more we're like, no, like it's way worse than we thought. And we're way farther behind than we thought. And that book that is our delivery of that downer message.
Did it make you because you said you were so like, yeah, I think there's something we can do, and then by the end you're like, no, not really, not soon anyway. Did it make you like sad? Like, man, I'm kind of disappointed in ourselves for finding all this information.
Yeah, so it made me sad, and then also like I had kind of made friends with a bunch of the people in the settlement community,
Mm,
and they are way more optimistic about the near-term prospects than I am. And I feel like if you hone in on one problem, you can see how that one problem can get fixed. And then you're like, well, there's nothing holding us back. But when you zoom out and you look at all of the problems together and how expensive and complicated they will all be and how the pieces fit together in this like complicated puzzle, it's much easier to be far more pessimistic about the near term prospects. And so I was bummed out that I'm probably not going to see settlements in my lifetime.
mm.
And I was bummed out that all the people who I contacted saying, I'm writing a book about how settlements are coming soon, were probably going to think that I was like being disingenuous and dishonest because that book ended up being about how this stuff's not coming soon. And so I apologize to a lot of people like, oh, I'm sorry. I meant it. I really thought it was going to happen. I wasn't lying to you.
Well, being involved with something like scientific, like that's the point. Like the point is to hash out all this stuff. Here's my hypothesis. I'm going to go with this, and I just discovered that it ain't going to work because of these reasons, and that's the point of science.
Yeah, thank you. And so I wish the entire community was filled with people like you. Like, these are exciting problems that we still need to solve. And like the path to get there is exciting, I think. But since the book came out, we've had a lot of people say very nice things and say like, oh, it's really nice that we have all the problems set out, or a lot of the problems set out. So we sort of know what we still need to do. But another person referred to us as the enemy after reading our book. Uh, and somebody else compared our book to Mein Kampf, which was
Oh my!
Hitler's book. I know, right? Like, come on, man. There's a very different scale in being like, oh, I think maybe space settlements are a near-term possibility, and like the genocide of millions. And so, like, people we've had polar reactions. A lot of people have really liked it. We had a lot of nice reviews, but the people who are really into settlement are not happy with us.
Well, I think that's probably what makes a good anything is when you have people on both sides that are like, yeah, this is I read it and it was awesome, and then I was like, I read it and I did not like it. I mean, regardless, people read it, but it makes conversations then need to be had, right? Even for the people that didn't like it, then they talk more about it, or maybe, just maybe there was one of those people that are like, um I don't agree with you, but let's talk about this. Or maybe they talked about it amongst other people, and then they kind of change their mind a little bit about this particular thing. Maybe they still think overall it could happen, but that's what's good about it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if in a perfect world, that's what happens. And I do hope we've started some of those conversations. I think when your book gets compared to Mein Kampf, you can be
Yeah,
like, okay, we're not going to have a productive conversation over here. I'm going to focus my energy over here. But we have had some productive conversations.
that's really cool because again, that's why I would imagine I never wrote a book. I would imagine that's why you write a book is to get people talking about it. So it was good, and overall too, I feel like you could make tiny books out of like all these chapters because everything was like, all right, here's a big issue, and here's how we work through it. And I feel like I think you even said, and some of them are like, um, we could talk more about this, but our publisher said we probably shouldn't be nerding out so much about all these things, but I feel like it could have been more for each thing.
Each chapter could have been a book, and it was
Yeah,
so painful. And so the book is 400 pages long. I'm amazed you managed to audiobook it in 2 days. That's heroic. But like there was a bunch of chapters that got cut where our editor was like, this book can't be a cube, like you need to write we need to cut some. And so we've tried to find different homes for those chapters. But yeah, there was so much more that could be said. And I think the most common complaint we get from people who aren't comparing us to Hitler is something like, oh, I wish you had told me more about how the nuclear reactors work and stuff like that. And
mm.
it's like, oh man, there's so many tough decisions that go into writing a book about what gets cut and what stays. And anyway, yeah, could have written a lot more.
Well, that's I mean, as someone who's not like super into a lot of these things, like you made a point to tell the readers like, hey, we could really go in depth here, but here's a little bit. And sometimes that even a little bit was like, I was like, I don't even understand that part of it. So but you did a good job of telling us that there's way more out there, or this is kind of nerdy, so we're going to turn people off if we add these things. So it was cool too, because then you felt like, okay, well, this book is for people who are really like the idea of going to Mars, or like space, also for people who don't and who aren't like super into those technical words and all that kind of stuff, because you helped, for lack of a better term, dumb it down a little bit so people can understand.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the hardest sell was the 4 or 5 chapters on international law. So like when we told our editor, we're like, we're gonna do 5 chapters on international law, she was like, I don't think anyone's gonna want to read a book with 5 chapters on international law. But we felt like it had to go in there because it's just so important for understanding what the risks are moving forward, and understanding, how unclear the rules are and how it could spark conflict. And so we tried to make it as funny as we could. We did tons of outside reading to try to find like stories to make it exciting. But yeah, it's tough. The
Yeah.
more, I mean, law is a tough topic to make interesting sometimes, but we did our best.
Well, and that was my like biggest thing, was like, how can we make going to the Mars or Moon or wherever, another civilization, how we can make it work there if we can't even make it work here? And part of it, so that was like my big thing, is like, there's no way people are going to completely change how they live their life. And it's not even just like the overarching of like, people need to own things, like that's just something that humans, I got to own this, or I got to own that, or I got to own this land. And then like, cooperating is not something we're really good at. Even such stuff simple as composting and recycling is something that we're trying to drill home to people, that's good to do, that people just don't do it. So how are we ever gonna get there just on that piece?
Well, and so space, there's this idea called the overview effect, and you hear it often. Like if an astronaut is interviewed, they'll say something to the effect of, you look down at Earth and there's no borders, and you see how we could all work together, and there's this tiny blue ribbon around the Earth that's our atmosphere, and we need to protect it, and the view of Earth from above makes all of this clear. And so the idea is that all of these problems that we have are going to be solved because if you look at Earth from above, then it changes everything about the way you view the world, and politicians are going to get along. But that's ridiculous. Like,
Yeah.
so one, you can see borders from space.
Yeah.
I got to interview a cosmonaut, and he's like, which is a Russian astronaut, that's their equivalent. And so and he was like, you can see North Korea and South Korea, and you can see, I think it was India and Bangladesh or something like that. There's like a couple places where you absolutely can see borders, and they represent conflict on Earth that is visible from space. And there's all these stories about astronauts. Like one astronaut came home and her boyfriend left her for someone else, so she tried to kidnap the girlfriend. And like, we are humans on Earth. We're going to be humans in space. It doesn't matter how pretty the view is. We're going to come back home and fight. Like, that's what we do. We're going to be humans in space too, I think. But I'm maybe a pessimist.
No, I totally agree. Like, if you can't even, if you have to put up a fence in between you and your neighbor because you had an argument one time, and now this just seems like the best solution. Like, how are we going to be able to go? I think in the book it said it takes 6 months to get to Mars, I believe. I can't remember for sure.
Yeah.
But how are we going to go 6 months away, and then if something happens, you want to go back to, like, it ain't going to happen. And it's frustrating that I'm sure there are people out there like, yeah, it's just going to be, it's new, so everyone's going to be different, everyone's going to be, it's like, no, sorry.
Everybody projects utopia onto space settlements, and you get all of these different utopias. You get, some people are like, oh, everyone's going to be able to be individualistic, freedom is going to reign, blah, blah, blah. And then other people are like, well, we're all going to be communal and we're going to share a lot better. And like all of these different ideas that don't match together are somehow all going to come true in space. And it seems highly unlikely to me. But yeah, anyway.
Who knows? So yeah, that law part, it was interesting. Maybe not 5 chapters worth would have been interesting, but interesting in the part you put in there, because it is such a big deal to, you can't just go somewhere and be like, all right, now we're starting. I feel like there has to be a starting point before you get there. And I think that plays a big part of it, regardless of how boring it may seem to somebody. It is an important thing to be like, hey, we got to know what this is. We got to know where we're going, and we got to know what we're doing before we get there.
Well, And I also think it's interesting. So, okay, so Elon Musk is the guy who runs SpaceX and who's driving Twitter into the ground. And he's really into this idea of settling Mars. And so he'll say on Twitter that like we're gonna have boots on the ground by 2029, and 2 to 3 decades after that, we're going to have a self-sustaining settlement. And in the Starlink terms of service, so Starlink is his internet provider, which is providing our amazing connection today. He's got in the terms of service, it says something to the effect of, and if there's a civilization that starts on Mars, it's going to be, unbound by the laws of Earth, and it's going to be its own thing. And like, so a bunch of the stuff he's saying straightforwardly violates international law. There is a treaty from 1967 that the US has ratified, and all the major spacefaring powers have also agreed to as well, that says you cannot claim land in space. So he's like, we're going to go and we're going to set up our little area and we're going to have our own laws. And like, no, the Outer Space Treaty says you can't claim land, and that people who come from Earth still belong to the nation that they came from. So like Elon Musk is still going to be the United States' responsibility. He's still supposed to follow international law. And so I felt like it was helpful to know that a bunch of the stuff that you hear in like pop culture stuff is violating international law in a way that will no doubt make like Russia and China, very angry. If we were to go ahead and actually violate those things that we've, signed on to for, I think, more than 50 years.
Yeah, and well, Elon is his own dude anyway, and he is going to say all that stuff and do everything, and so I would imagine it is frustrating just when you're the head of the United States or part, space programs or this or that, and this guy's just saying all these things. You're like, you're unaware of what's out there already, and like he also has billions of dollars, so it's hard to like,
yeah,
because the world works through money. Like it's hard to tell this guy no, because you also probably need him for some other thing.
So one of the biggest surprises to me after the book came out was how much geopolitical power Musk actually has. So, when Russia invaded Ukraine, they managed to knock out a bunch of Ukraine's internet connections. So it was hard for like the Ukrainian military to communicate. And so they asked Musk, can you send us your Starlink satellites? Because they talk to space and we can bring these like dishes with us anywhere, and like the internet can move with us. And so he said yes. And he sent a bunch of these dishes, and they went to Ukraine, and this really made Russia angry. And so Russia said at a United Nations meeting something to the effect of like, hey, we're just saying that if satellites are being used to provide internet to, this country that we're at war with, although they didn't say at war because they're calling it a special military operation, but they're clearly at war. But anyway, we would have a right to blow those quasi-military satellites out of space. And they do have the technology for blowing satellites up in space, for like shooting at them from the ground. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, Musk was like, it seems like he got scared, which I would get scared too, because he's invested a lot in that. And then he decided he was going to start limiting where those satellites could be used. And so like the Ukrainian military would get some of their land back, and they discovered that they couldn't use their internet in that new area because Musk had like blocked it off because it was in like the Russian territory, a week before or something like that. Yeah. And so the US government and the Ukrainian military had to talk to Musk to be like, hey, can we please get internet service here? And Musk was like deciding where Ukraine could get their military like intelligence, how they could pass it around over the internet. And I think since then, the United States has like worked with Musk to figure out a system for how this is all going to work, so that it's not so like you got to literally call Musk, Monday morning to be like, hey, can we please get another cup of internet or whatever? But like, and so anyway, I was surprised by how much power he had. But at the end of the day, a common thing that I hear people say is like, how is anyone going to stop Musk if he makes it to Mars and he wants to do his own thing? And the answer is that he's not allowed to launch any of his rockets without permission from the US government. And so if he gets a bunch of people to Mars and they're not following international law, it would be the United States' responsibility to say, we're not launching any more resupply ships until you guys fall into line and like start following the treaties that our country ratified many decades ago. So you do have some power over what he does when he gets there, because you could essentially, starve them all out by not letting them get, food from Earth. So anyway, international law is interesting.
That sounds terrifying too. Is you're 6 months away and you're like, hey, yeah, we're not giving you anything. I know you guys can't make food yet, and I know you can't do all this stuff, and now we're just not going to give you anything. Uh,
Right.
it's
Yeah,
so
and if you
scary.
don't get your act together soon, you have to wait another 2 years because, like, the way Mars orbits the
Oh,
sun and Earth orbits, they're not always like in positions where it's easy to send a rocket back and forth.
yeah,
And so, if you miss that window, it's like, well, you got for 2 years, you're on your own. It's scary indeed, and especially if it's like because Musk is being a jerk. Like Musk being a jerk has ruined my Twitter experience, but at least it's not ruining my food supply. Like that would be worse.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, that was a thing too. Is I wrote down here, um, oxygen, oxygen as a utility, and that was something in my brain because when obviously we're here, we're not in space, but we got to pay utility bills for electric and gas and water and all that stuff. But when you're going somewhere and you need different things, I feel like because we go back to the thing of people needed to own things and have the rights to stuff, and I feel like that could be a thing too. We're like, hey, we have this settlement 1,000 years from now. You didn't pay your oxygen bill, so now we got to shut it off. Like that stuff seems scary to me, but it also seems like something that could happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so there's this guy in the UK. His name is Charles Cockell, and we were hoping it would be Cockle. Like because it looked, as Weinersmiths, we were hoping there'd be like a fellow funny last name, but he made it very clear that no, he does not pronounce his name
Oh,
that way. But anyway, good for him. He's above us. But so he has this idea that like if you're in a habitat that's connected and probably like for economic reasons, you'd have just like a habitat that is all connected as opposed to everybody having their own individual pod. You'll have people who are in charge of the oxygen supply. And so, like you said, you can charge people for oxygen, which, like, that's interesting. Like, do people who exercise, are they going to have to pay more for
yeah,
their oxygen supply? But also, if you've got somebody who's controlling oxygen, that's like, that's profound control over people. So, like,
mm-hmm.
if your lights are switched off, you can survive. If someone's threatening to switch your oxygen off, you can't. And so, he argues that this creates an environment for like authoritarian governments where people can have a lot of control by threatening to kill everybody by controlling the oxygen supply. But, you'll get other people who say that space is the perfect environment for freedom. And I'm just not sure how they can defend that argument personally.
No, no, not at all. There is wherever we go, there's always someone telling you to do something, or
Yeah.
how to do something, or what you can have.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and
Yeah.
oxygen in space is scary too, because like, so there's the famous story of Apollo 1, which was like a simulation on the ground where they were sort of running through what would happen in space, and the entire environment in their little simulation capsule was pure oxygen, which is highly flammable.
Yeah.
And so it caught fire, and 3 astronauts were killed in the fire.
Hmm.
And Russia had they were doing a similar sort of simulation, and Valentin Bondarenko was in a all oxygen environment, and he had just finished the simulation, and he had a little ethanol wipe, and he was wiping off a little bit of like sticky stuff on his arm because he had a medical sensor there,
Hmm.
and he meant to throw it in the trash, but he missed, and he threw it on the hot plate. And so he also died in an oxygen fire. And so and like so you can have less oxygen to sort of take care of that problem, but still whenever you're generating the oxygen, there's a problem. And so like some of the scariest parts of the research process to me were reading about problems that happened in space.
Hmm.
So on Mir, which was a Russian space station, their oxygen canister, so this like little thing that runs a reaction that generates oxygen for everyone to breathe, something went wrong with it and it started shooting fire out.
Oh my.
Like, can you imagine being in the middle of space and like the your tiny little habitat is filling up with smoke and there's a huge fire, and this was around the time that the Soviet Union was falling apart. And so like the equipment they were sending up was low quality. They couldn't get like new equipment regularly, and so they were putting on oxygen masks so they weren't breathing in the smoke, and the first couple they put on didn't work because they
Oh,
were broken, and so they had to get new ones. And they finally got the oxygen canister fixed, and then they all had to like literally get naked and scrub the chemicals off of their body. And so they were like, 4 men in space totally naked scrubbing off in the middle of like floating in space. And then they had to put a new oxygen canister in. Can you imagine the moment where you're like, oh, I hope this wasn't from the same batch and it's not going to happen again. And anyway, so everything is scarier in space. Like you can't just escape when something like that happens. And there's all these stories about like on the ISS, everyone's like, oh, guys, you got to stop the experiments because we got to go find the leak. Like, are the
Oh
sensors
my
saying there's a leak?
God.
And it's like, oh my gosh, the vacuum of space is slowly leaking into our habitat. And apparently it's not that hard to patch tiny leaks, but like, can you
No,
imagine?
no, the most terrifying thing to me is just something happening and you're just free floating in space and you can't get to where you're supposed to get back to, and you're just like, well, I guess this is it. Then I'm just another piece in the space and in the atmosphere now, and it's like I said at the beginning, it's all terrifying to me. And this book solidified my need to never go near space, um, and I'm happy with that. I'm okay with that.
Well, connecting to our last conversation, space doesn't have bugs. So I have no desire to go to space because the cool stuff's down here. But sorry
Yeah,
about the cough. There,
no,
there
you're
was
good.
one other particularly scary story, and I'll keep it short. It was an earlier, so was a Soyuz space station run by the Soviets. And they were going around Earth, and the power goes out. And just everything gets dark. And so like space stations are very loud. There's all these machines generating your oxygen, cleaning the air, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden it's dark and quiet and silent. And they go, I guess their like radio home still worked, but back then they didn't have enough sort of like towers and like facilities all around the earth. So there'd be areas where you couldn't make contact. There were like dead zones. And so they called the Soviet Union and they were like, the power just went out. And then they went into a dead zone and they couldn't get any help and everything was off.
Oh,
And I guess they figured it out after like 10, 15 minutes. I don't know how long it took for them to figure it out, but like, can you imagine the power going
mm.
out and then you losing your connection with the engineers who could tell you what was wrong? Like,
Well, yeah, my children freak out now when the power goes out for 10
right.
seconds.
Yeah, mine too. Mine too. Yeah, it blips and they're like, ah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, we can still breathe, guys. It's okay.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I didn't even think about that. Like the power's out. That's creating your oxygen. You said
Right.
it, and it just flew over my head. Yes. Oh my gosh.
Everything. I mean, you supremely depend on technology in space with
Mhm.
like for everything. And so, when Musk says something like, in 20 to 30 years, we're going to have a self-sustaining Mars settlement, that means that you don't need anything from Earth anymore. No Earth equipment. And so he's saying that in 20 to 30 years, they're going to be making like their own computer chips and generating their own oxygen canisters and like and making their own laptops. Like, I just don't see that level of, industry and technology in the next couple decades. Anyway.
Well, you even made a point to. I mean, all this stuff is very intricate, and something that's vital to our society now is cement. And you made a point to talk about cement. Is that how we get in construction equipment up there, and even lubricant and all this stuff like, and we want to make microchips.
Yeah, everything is 5,000 times harder in space. And 5,000 is probably an underestimate, but like, so Jeff Bezos, who, was the CEO of Amazon, he's got a company called Blue Origin. His vision isn't Mars. His vision is rotating space stations. And this was an idea that became popular in the 70s. And the idea is if you rotate the station, you can create gravity that's similar to what you have on Earth. And so if it ends up being a problem trying to develop in a lower than lower than the gravity we have on Earth environment, then these habitats would sort of solve that problem. But part of his like excitement about those facilities is that we could do all of our industrial work and all of the stuff that causes pollution in space. And then that way we can make Earth pristine again by like putting all the bad stuff up there. And so cement was just one example where it's like when you start to think about the details, it becomes impossible. Like the moon is horrible. So like 2 weeks on Earth, the moon's nighttime is that long and its daytime is that long too. But it gets really cold on the moon because it has no atmosphere. And so we like don't have lubricants that work well when it gets that cold, and trying to like work through the dirt on the moon, it's like different than what we've got here. It's much sharper, so it's like abrasive and it wears down your equipment, and it kind of gets like chunky. And so it like gets clogged up in equipment. And anyway, yes, trying to drop enough cement on Earth so that we don't have to make it here is a ridiculous idea.
And just a quick aside, because I just happened to have a conversation about this, because everything in your book is so like obviously it's a lot of research and that kind of stuff. Did you and your husband talk about the difference between cement and concrete?
Did I get it right? Are you asking because I got it wrong?
Well, I guess
It's all right. Tell me. Did I get it wrong?
So cement is in concrete. So
Hmm.
concrete is a mixture of cement, water, sand, and some other stuff. So
Uh-huh.
I just didn't know like what like I technically you didn't because you still need cement to make concrete, but
Hmm.
but people use those interchangeably and they're not interchangeable. They're not the same thing.
I think in the thing I just said, I did use them interchangeably because I have to admit that I forgot the difference.
Yeah.
But when I was doing the research, I did know the difference, I think, and I hope I didn't get it wrong, but maybe I did.
No, I think you're fine, and
Okay.
we're getting way too much into this, but it's funny to me because I think you're fine because as long as you're using the word cement the whole time, it is a thing. And yes, you still need cement to make concrete, so it makes sense. But when people use them interchangeably, that's when people get it. Like, especially construction people are like, no, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, I tried because one of them, I think, as you just said, includes water,
Yeah,
and you wouldn't bother getting the water from the moon before you ship it down to Earth. You just use water from Earth. And
yeah,
so I think I tried to use whatever word doesn't include water. But
yeah. And
yeah,
you nailed it, and that's what I was trying to figure out. So you got it. Good. Yeah.
okay.
I just the only reason I brought it up is because I like I said I just had a conversation about it. We were walking around my park, looking at broken sidewalks and stuff, and people were kept using those two words, and my boss was like, those are two different things, right? I'm like,
Hmm.
yeah, we're good.
And at one point, I knew the difference, but it
Yeah.
has since escaped me.
And that's all right. When you write a book about space, I think the the thing you need to know least is the difference between cement and concrete.
Well, I had to know it, while I wrote that page. But
Yeah.
and in general, my memory is awful because I am like such a product of my generation. And if I can take notes on a Google Doc, I'm like, this doesn't have to go in my brain because I can always just, search for the word. So there's a bunch of stuff I've offloaded to my Google Docs, and
Yeah,
then when I'm
I have a terrible memory too, and actually, I just had a meeting with one of my assistants, and it was me, my two assistants, and my boss, and we kind of had like because hey, my boss called the meeting. He's like, "This is a safe space. We will air grievances, this and that, and everybody's fine for the most part." But one of my assistants is like, sometimes I don't come to you for if I have a question because sometimes when I ask you that question, that's where it goes to die and nothing happens with it. And I'm like, I'm well aware of what you're talking about, man. I
oh
know, and I'm trying to be better at it. And I have post-it notes everywhere in my office, like all these things people ask me to do or this or that. And I'm well aware that my memory is not where it should be. And I think it's more ADHD than my memory. But I'm trying to get better at that. But either way, anyway.
yeah, no, my memory is awful also. My daughter also is like, Mom, did you remember to do blah blah blah? And I'm like, no, I love you. Thank you for the reminder.
My reminder is always another email saying, "Hey, did you do this yet?"
Hmm. Yep.
um uh just looking at my notes here. One interesting thing to me is and this is a big shift from memories and cement, but the idea of so obviously in especially in the United States, white flight is a huge thing and it's still a thing. Like people are still white people are going to run out of room that they call their own eventually, and it's still a real thing that's happening. And the idea of I think in the book you called it celestial white flight was interesting to me too because I thought of it a couple ways. Like, yeah, I think again white flight is still happening. Also, because of the wealth distribution in this country, like it is going to be white people that are going to space because that's just how it works. When you guys wrote about this, like what were your thoughts of like I guess explaining this or understanding like yes, this is probably going to happen if and when it happens.
Yeah, so that, to be honest, that was an idea we hadn't thought about on our own. So there's a professor named Kilgore DeWitt who wrote a history of sort of race and space, and so he pointed out that so there's backing up for a second. So the rotating space station people, they argue that there's so many resources in space that you can create so many of these rotating habitats that if you're living somewhere and you don't want to live there, you can just move to a different habitat. And that way we can, like, if you're having problems with people, you can just move to a different place and we're going to have all of this mobility and it's going to make life so easy. And so Kilgore DeWitt pointed out that, this could just result in white flight going up to the stars. If you're in an uncomfortable situation, you just use your money to move to a different rotating space station. And I think the problem of money is, as you just pointed out, is going to be magnified in space because it's going to be so much more expensive to move from one place to another in space. And this also gets into immigration questions. I
Mhm.
don't know why people in space think we're going to have like open borders for all of these different habitats where we don't even have them on Earth.
Yeah.
And on Earth, like if someone moves to your city, you don't worry if there's enough oxygen for everybody. Like you worry about jobs, but like the problem is compounded. And so yeah, I think there's all of these questions about inequality that, you know, when you start thinking about these problems expanding into the stars, into the heavens, it gets really uncomfortable. And we had somebody like in particular in response to that celestial white flight point say like, oh, you're telling us that space is racist. And I'm like,
Hmm.
no, the argument is more like subtle, like, but we should be thinking about this stuff because we want to make sure that when we go to space, you know, we got a lot of problems on Earth. If we slow this down and we can try to make sure those problems don't follow us to space, that would be great. Like, can we think about how we can move to space without expanding inequality? And those are difficult questions.
Yeah, and people already don't like being uncomfortable. Like
Yeah.
it's it's not a good feeling when I go to a new place. I'm immediately uncomfortable until I see someone that looks like me, and it makes me feel a little bit better, you know.
Yeah.
And so it's being uncomfortable is like I said, no one wants to do it, so they're gonna make it the least uncomfortable they can. They being the people that go up there first, you know,
Yep.
and it kind of leads into the part when you guys talk about the psychology of space and people like having issues and you know in dealing the things that astronauts have to do now in order to get into space and then getting up there and having to deal with all those other things that I don't know the exams and stuff, but maybe there's probably not a question that's like, do you like black people? You know, that's probably not a question that gets asked. But then when you go up there and there's all these people and you got to deal with that up there, then instead of, and, you know, it's like you said, it's a lot easier um, to deal with it here. Not to say the solving part of it is easier, but you're not trying to, you know, take away people's oxygen or hog other things, you know, food and that kind of stuff that now you have to deal with because um, as you said, astronauts are liars, you know. So and everybody is. So when you get up into space, everything changes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so far on the space stations, things have been pretty good. And I think partly that's because there's like extensive training and like cultural sensitivity lessons. And I do think that like they have a bunch of activities where they'll like literally like drop you in a tundra somewhere where it's really cold and you'll be with their group and you have to just work it out for a week before they come pick you up again. And so I think that they figure out like, okay, is this somebody who is going to treat another member of the crew as lesser because they don't look like them? And then that person doesn't get to go to space because you need to be a team. But when you stop having those, and I'm, you know what, and I'm sure it's not perfect. I'm sure there's still a
Yeah.
ton of problems. I shouldn't make it sound like they've got it all figured out because nobody does.
No.
But when you start opening it up to like, you know, whoever can pay for a ticket or something like that, and you've got even less oversight, these problems are only going to get worse. And, you know, if you're on Mars and you don't have like, so if when you're on Mars, the shortest communication delay is 3 minutes. And when Mars is farthest from Earth, it's 22 minutes long. So
Okay.
if you need to talk to like a psychologist back home, like you can't have that live conversation. And so, you know, you're really out there on your own with, you know, working through the problems with the group you've got. And so yeah, these kinds of problems are going to become even more pronounced when you're sort of stuck in space together.
Yeah. And the stories you talked about in the book, you guys talked about when of people cheating on, you know, cheating on exams or hiding symptoms and, you know, because they know like, well, if I know this is how they want me to answer it, so I'm gonna answer it how they want me to because I want to go into space. You know, and then when you throw into the fact that oh these now it's just seemingly random people that can afford to go. Well, who are you to tell them I just paid $500,000 to go to space? You're not going to tell me I can't go. You know, and
Yeah.
it could be any of these people.
Yeah. Yeah. And lying is yeah, one of the so we read literally dozens of astronaut biographies. And you would think that those would be interesting because astronauts are like, oh man, astronauts, they get to go to space. But most astronaut biographies are awful. They're not good writers. They think that you care about the details of some like tiny engineering problem, and they'll go on for pages and pages about this tiny engineering problem. And anyway, it's really boring. But almost every single biography had a lie that someone told along the way. And sometimes it's a lie of omission. Like one person, it was like a week before he was going to go to space, he thought he was having a heart attack and he didn't tell anyone because if he wouldn't be able to go. And it's like, imagine if he had had the heart attack, like while his crewmate was doing a spacewalk or something and
Yeah.
he was inside, like they really depend on each other up there. And so anyway, yeah, the incentive system is absolutely geared towards lying because you don't want anyone to know you're having a physical or a psychological problem either before your flight or on your flight because you want to make sure you get to go and maybe even go again. And so like one guy, this was before the era of like electronic medical records.
Mm-hmm.
They let him carry the folder with his medical records across the country to his interview. So he just took
Oh
out the
my
pages with
gosh.
bad stuff. And he even admitted, he's like, if I had a glass eye and they asked, do I have a glass eye? I would have lied to them while they stared at me. And I would have been like, you prove it. You
Yeah.
prove this is a glass eye. And so anyway, they all admit to lie. Not all of them. Many, 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 many admit to
Yeah.
lies to make it in and to stay in.
Well, everybody here did that with COVID, to some degree, maybe not at the beginning, but towards the end, like, well, I might have it, but I'm not going to test for it because then like you said, you got to prove that I have COVID right now.
Yeah.
And, so it's just the nature of, of human beings if they want to do something, they're going to find a way to do it, regardless if it's bad, if it hurts people or doesn't hurt people. I did like when you were describing like the perfect astronaut or the person going to space, you said a hyper confident Ned Flanders, and I started laughing because then I immediately pictured Ned Flanders when he takes his shirt off and he's jacked.
Oh, I didn't remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, he's this good dude, and also he's ripped.
Yeah, that's like what is his name? Chris Hadfield. I don't know if he's ripped, but he seems very Ned Flandersy to me, and they're all like, yeah, hyper focused and great in an emergency, but also calm, and they're very rare people, not like most of us. And even they're lying. And I think, we are really good at lying to ourselves too.
Yeah,
And so, you get like a little runny nose and you'll be like, okay, maybe this is the start of COVID, but we're also getting kind of close to fall, which is my allergy season, and the
yeah,
tests are expensive. It's probably allergies. I don't need to test for it, even though there's part of you that knows like, oh, I should be testing. And so,
yeah.
we're good at lying to ourselves too.
Well, even I'm still getting over sickness, and that was the first I did a tele visit with my doctor, and they're like, "Well, first thing you gotta do is test for COVID, and then basically then I can help you, and I'll give you an antibiotic if it's negative." I said, "Okay." So I mean, I wasn't going to, even though, like you said, everyone knows they should. So I did, and I was negative, and then they sent me an antibiotic, and I was good to go. But it took my doctor to be like, "No, do it, please," and then we'll go from there.
Yep, yep.
Yeah. Um, the another chapter was talking about doing settlements somewhere other than Mars. And you guys phrased that at the beginning, like we're gonna do like I forget exactly what you said, but the least worst the what did I say, like
There
the
are
least
worse
worst
options.
option.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And you started with asteroids, and I'm like, wait, that's the least worst options is asteroids?
I mean, space is awful, like profoundly awful. And
Yeah.
like, so, the moon is not going to be good for like the moon is a great place to learn about how to not die in space because it's
Okay.
close. And if something goes wrong, you can get back in like 2 or 3 days,
Okay.
which, thank goodness the Apollo 13 crew certainly benefited from that. But
Mhm.
if you go to Mars, as you said, it's 6 months there, 6 months back. And because of orbital mechanics, you can only start the trip back like every 2 years or something like that. So you're really stuck. You want to have everything figured out before then.
Mhm.
But Mars has a lot more of the stuff we need to survive. And so it's the best place probably to start a settlement. And then after that, like we talked to some people who thought we read a couple proposals who thought that Mercury would be good. And so Mercury is closest to the sun. So it's really hot. Like
Yeah.
when it's exposed to the sun, it's like pizza oven hot. But when you're on the part that's not exposed to the sun, it's like freezer cold. So they were proposing that you could. All right, so there's this spot where it's like dusk, like the day is turning to night, and the temperature in that little spot isn't so bad.
Yeah.
And so they were like, you could put your settlement like on wheels and just follow that band that goes from day to night as Mercury turns and like rotates on its axis. And so your settlement would have to move like a mile a day. Mercury spins pretty slowly, like every day. Otherwise, you like burn up in a fiery inferno. Like, so that doesn't sound like a good idea to me.
No.
Yeah, and then Venus is so hot that the average temperature melts lead, and it has so much pressure that like you wouldn't care that you were melting away because you would have been squished already. And there's sulfuric acid clouds over your head, right? Like just
that's what you. Sorry. Whenever I laugh now, I cough. But this, I wrote down. I thought it was a good phrase. You're like, Venus' atmosphere is above and below hell.
That's right. That's right. It's so bad. But so this, so like above those sulfuric acid clouds, the temperature is kind of like Earth, and the gravity is kind of like Earth. And so there's a bunch of people who are proposing putting settlements, and I don't totally understand how this would work, but like in Venus's atmosphere. And to be honest, I thought that it was like one person wrote a weird proposal about how this might happen. But after the book came out, the Humans to Venus organization contacted us, and they asked us to like chat with them over Zoom. So we had a talk, and they were trying to convince us that like, no, Venus is a good plan. And we were like, oh, like you guys have really interesting ideas and you're asking good questions. But anyway, I would not want to live above sulfuric acid clouds. And again, no bugs. So not worth it. Yeah, no bugs. And then the asteroids are so far away that it's going to be really cold. Solar power is going to be hard. So the asteroid belt is out past Mars. But there are a lot of resources out there. And so people argue like you could hollow out the inside of an asteroid and you could live in there while you mine for water. But I think most people agree that that's like a sad existence. And that maybe you'll just have people out there like temporarily to collect resources that maybe you'll bring to Mars. But like then you have the gas giants, which you can't live on, and then you can't have solar power the farther out you go. Or you can, but not enough to like have a settlement. So it's, I mean, most of space is just awful. It's just awful.
You mentioned when you mentioned asteroids of living underground, and I feel like that was a theme, and it's even the cover of the book, is like I feel like the answer to a lot of these things, like, well, it's just got to be underground. That's just the easiest solution.
Oh, sorry.
No. And even like but even that, it makes it sound very simple. Like, yeah, that's the answer. But even that, obviously, there's a bunch of questions for that and issues go, for that part of it, living underground.
Yeah, so that we sent to Mars a surveyor or a piece of equipment that was meant to like drill down something like a meter so that it could like measure Mars quakes, like Mars geological activity. And it got down like a couple inches before it just couldn't get down any farther. Like there was a number of different problems. Like it was compacted where they were, and the equipment kept slipping. But like that's how good we are at digging on Mars right now. Like it's complicated, and you're not going to know how complicated till you get there. But I think one of the biggest surprises to me while researching the book was that we're probably going to have to live underground, because all of the artistic renderings that I had seen were like these beautiful glass domes with looks, you can look out at the heavens, you can see the Earth rise from the moon. But like, so radiation in space is different than radiation on Earth, and there's lots of it, and we don't understand it well. And so, but if you bury yourself under meters of dirt, you're protected from it. So if it's gonna kill us, that's one way to protect us. Plus, space experiences massive temperature swings, which is going to be really bad for your equipment, expanding and contracting over and over again, day after day. But if you're under dirt, that reduces your temperature swings. And space has tons of debris that's like shooting down and, impacting the planet and possibly going to poke a hole in your habitat. And having a meter of dirt over you helps protect against that too. So there's a lot of reasons why we're going to likely bury our habitats under dirt. And so now you're like, you've moved to Mars to live as like an ant and like, or a mole or something. And it's not at all like I had imagined. It makes the dream much less beautiful, I think, to imagine that you're living underground like that. But
it sounds like your dream. You can live like a bug.
That's, well, I don't know that I want to be a bug. I like watching them like from afar, partly because it makes me appreciate being a human even more, especially when I'm watching the parasitoids.
Could you I'm sure you've imagined it. Like if you go to another planet and you're digging around and you find a bug, like I'm sure that has crossed your mind.
Yeah, I mean that would
Yeah.
be incredible.
Yeah.
I,
First of all, uh, equally terrifying is finding other living things on other places,
yeah,
which I'm sure they're out there, but I don't like to think about it. But as someone who enjoys bugs as much as yourself, like I would feel like that would be your number one mission. Like, hey, Kelly, you're going to Mars. You got to do all these things so we can survive. And then you're like, okay, well, I'm also gonna look for bugs.
yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, so it's possible that Mars has like bacteria because Mars used to be warmer and wetter.
Mm,
And so I think it's an interesting question. Like, what happens if you do find bacteria and you get some indication that humans being there is going to like kill the bacteria because they'll get like outcompeted by our bacteria or something?
yeah.
Do you care about that? And I think maybe most people would say absolutely not. I like, I happily use bleach on my toilet every day. Like I don't care about the bacteria. But as like a someone who has spent a lot of time reading about like evolutionary biology and stuff like that, like it would be very interesting to see like a whole new, life is arising for the first time somewhere else. How is it different than us? And I do feel like there are interesting questions about how we should sort of restrain our activities somewhere else if we do discover life so that we can, at least understand it before we encroach upon it more.
Um, I don't think. I
You
think
don't
that
care.
I don't think people care. I mean, look how they treat the Earth right now.
Yeah, that's right. Fair enough. Far more beautiful, amazing creatures are going into decline. They probably don't care about the bacteria.
But I agree with you. It's probably something that should happen. And maybe depending on the people who go, like that is a thought in their mind, or they are told, like, guys, this is brand new, and if we introduce stuff, or if stuff gets introduced into us, this whole thing is done. So maybe the threat. Well, I was gonna say the threat of death, but people don't care about our climate, and that's probably gonna kill us too. So
What an optimistic tone we're hitting here. Yeah, no, I mean that's the other thing people talk about. We're going to be able to like engineer Mars one day to be this nice Earth-like habitat, and I'm like, we can't even keep Earth nice. How are we going to
mm,
start from like worse? Like, if we can fix Mars to make it Earth-like, why can't we fix Earth
yeah.
to like undo what we're doing? And these things are way more complicated.
Why? Yeah. Why can't we spend all that money to help where we currently are?
Yeah. Yep.
Um. There are a couple other things. Real quick. I know. I know. I don't want to keep it too long, but I'm assuming the chapter 9 on inputs and outputs was something that a lot of people find interesting because it is very human to
Mm-hmm.
have to go to the restroom. So it's I thought it was funny, and then the thought of floating poop particles in your space station was gross. It's so
Oh,
gross.
so gross. And so the astronauts say that the questions they get asked the most are about how to use the restroom. And every single station that we read about had a story about feces escaping and floating around. And one space shuttle group called them brown trout.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, this is so gross. This is so gross. You never know when you're breathing in like aerosol feces.
My mom told me one time, and it and now it never it's always in my brain now. She told me, Lorenzo, did you know when you flush the toilet, stuff sprays out of the toilet at some ridiculous miles per hour? I'm like, I did not know that, mom, and now I'm forever gonna know that there's just stuff shooting. It changed how I like brush my teeth now in the restroom. It's and once you hear something like that, you can't unhear it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm working on redoing my bathroom right now, like demolishing it and starting again. And I've been trying to figure out like, well, where do I store the towels? And I was gonna like put a shelf above the toilet, and then I was like, wait, no, stuff shoots out of the toilet. Like, can't be where the towels go. And then the
Yeah.
teeth brushes need to be on the opposite side of the vanity from the toilet so that they've got a lower probability of poop particles. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, gross. Another thing too, I'm sure you came across, and some of them you told. I'm sure you came across really like funny stories that didn't fit anywhere, or you had to cut or whatever. The one, and I heard about it before. It was the when it was, I think it was a comedian talking about it, how they didn't know how many tampons to send, so they're like, just send 100. and
Uh-huh.
I thought that was hilarious.
Hmm.
And it also goes to shows like they didn't even like talk to the females like enough to know that maybe this is too many. You know
Well,
that
so
I like the math you did though in the book. Is like, all right, well, we're gonna send this and then double it and then add more.
yeah, I mean that's how NASA solves pretty much all their problems by sending excess equipment. And I do feel like the one part that ruins that story a little is that Ray Senin was one of the women in the first class of astronauts that included women.
Mm-hmm.
And she was on the committee that made the decision about how many tampons to send.
Ah,
And she's a physician. And so she was like, like people vary in how much flow they've got, and we don't know what it's going to be like in space. And so she's like, you know what? That's fine. Let's just send tons of them. But apparently it was like, you see those magicians and they pull
yeah.
out one handkerchief and another is connected and keeps going like forever. I guess it was like that with the tampons. They had all been sort of tied together and it was like, this thing is never going to end. And anyway, yeah. So NASA does solve problems by overdoing it on the equipment.
Which to me seems weird. Like I feel like you're trying everything's calculated, and when you're taking shooting rockets off, maybe it's better now. But when you're shooting off from space, I feel like, well, we have a limited space, and we got to figure out how to what we're taking in. But maybe it's different now. I don't know. Maybe you can just take whatever the hell you want, and everything's okay.
No, no, I mean it's still expensive. So your space is limited. And I think Zach and I calculated this like a week or two ago to send an Apple to space at current lowest uh freight rates on like the cheapest rocket. It's $300 per Apple.
Oh
So like, I mean, that's where we are. So you don't have a lot of space to send stuff. You got to really pack those capsules, and each, the mass of everything is expensive. At
yeah,
least tampons don't weigh much, but
that's true. That's true.
they take up a lot of space if you've got that many.
Yeah. Did you come across any other things that you weren't able to put? I love. Well, I was gonna say this at the beginning. I forgot. One of the aspects of this book was that it was funny. That parts of it funny, and I do comedy from time to time, and so I like that part of it. And when you could talk about things that are very scientific and then throw a joke in there, or like a made up word or something where like gets people to laugh, it kind of like breaks the trance a little bit as opposed to like all the scientific stuff. I know for my brain, sometimes I lose what I'm reading. I'll read a whole page, like, wait a minute, I didn't even like comprehend. I got to go back. But all these things like break up that a little bit. And so I enjoyed that part of it. So that's why I'm asking, like, are there other like funny things that you guys could not include because it's a giant book?
Yeah. Well, so first, thank you. I really appreciate that compliment coming from you because you cracked me up. And again,
Thanks.
like I thought you were just so hilarious when you officiated my brother's wedding.
Oh, thank
Um,
you. Yeah, that
so
was a
I'm
lot of
glad
fun.
that, yeah, so I'm glad you thought it was funny. But yeah, so there's tons of stuff. And actually, one of the things I've been debating wanting to do in the new year is creating a podcast just to sort of share the funny stories we didn't get to put in the book.
Yeah.
I just don't know if anybody, I don't know how many people would want to hear it because a lot of it is about like cosmonauts and the Russian side of things. And
Uh-huh.
I don't think we're looking for like feel good, funny stories from Russia right now. But there's also a lot of bad stories from Russia that we could
Yeah,
do too.
yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of stories or a lot of stories that I wanted to go into more detail about, like
Mm-hmm.
the woman who went on the first space station and was handed an apron. That
Oh
was
shit.
horrible. Like I was so
Oh
upset
my
when
god.
I read that. And so yeah, there's humans, as we said, humans are humans on Earth and they're humans in
Yeah.
space, so they do funny stuff in space too. And yeah, there's lots of good stories.
Well, if you ever feel the need, I was just going to tell you, I was going to tell you after we recorded, but I'll just tell you now. I enjoy talking to you. You're really good. Some people just aren't good at having conversations. And it's fine. That's just how people's personalities are. But you're really good at having conversations. And as an audio snob, your audio sounds really good. So that's another thing that in my ears, I'm like, oh, this makes it better. But if you ever want to get those stories out, like you're more than welcome to come here and do it. I know I don't have a gigantic audience, but like if you would rather not put time into creating a thing and not knowing if people are going to listen to it and editing and all that kind of stuff, feel free to come on here whenever you want and share these stories, especially if it's like, hey Lorenzo, I got 15 minutes, can I come on and tell a story? Like I'll take it.
Oh, I love that idea. Thank you. Because I think I've talked myself out of the podcast, but there's a bunch of stories I'd like to tell. So yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, even if we set a time up, we're like, hey, I got an hour, I want to record a bunch of stories, and then we can decide how to put them out. But but everything about you is perfect for podcasting. Like I said, the audio portion is really good, but you're a good speaker. And another quick thing, speaking of talking, how'd you guys decide to when you would be the ones reading the audiobook and not having somebody else do it?
Yeah. Well, first, I also want to say you are a wonderful conversationalist, which is why I was so excited when you asked me that. Because we always have, and nobody has asked me about the celestial white flight thing. And so, like, I appreciate your willingness to be like, this is uncomfortable. Let's talk about the uncomfortable thing, because it's important. But so for Soonish, they tried, which is the book that Zach and I wrote before. They tried to get a big name to read the book, but they started the process way too late, and they couldn't get anyone. And so I was like, I love the sound of my own voice. I'll do it. And they were like, okay, so they sent me into the studio. And so I read that audiobook and Zach read our like short little stories that we put in between some of the chapters. And so that's how I ended up reading the first one. But then in this one, I offered to do it, but I said, but if you can find a professional that's like whatever makes the book easier for people to listen to. And so they found a professional to do most of the reading, but they wanted us to read some of it because we're not so bad at it. So they were like, well, it might as well. And so Zach and I split the little stories, which we kind of regretted because one of the little stories has a lot of hard to pronounce names. And so we were in the studio for a really long time debating the pronunciation and asking ChatGPT, how do you say this? And anyway, but it's fun. Like when I was in high school, I wanted to be in a grunge band but I didn't want to practice. And so like that didn't work out. But when I got to be in a studio for the first time, recording the first audiobook, like the guy who ran the studio like loved 90s music. So we were like geeking out about grunge rock. And it was, a weird way to feel like part of that dream had sort of come true in a roundabout, like life never takes the path you think it's going to. But it was fun to get to be in a recording studio for whatever reason, even if it was a nerdy book and not a grunge band.
Well, all those like little things that you get a taste of it and you're like, all right, well, I think that's all I needed. I feel fulfilled now, that I wanted to buy my grandma's car. And it was like $3,000 old car, 1985 Monte Carlo. It was their daily driver when they picked us up when we were little kids. My uncle was selling it. I was like, all right, I think I want to buy it. So I drove out there with Andrea. We drove it around. And then I pulled back in the driveway and I told Andrea, I was like, I don't think I want to buy this car. I was like, I think I just needed to be in it one more time. And that was it. That's all I needed. I just needed that feeling. I never drove it before. I was always in the back seat, and so it was cool just to be in it. And I that's all I needed. I felt good. Would I love to have that car? Sure. But there's so many issues and things with the old car, this and that. And I just felt like that's all I needed. The same like for you, like you want to be in a grunge band and you did this little thing and, and you felt good about it,
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah. And it sounded good. Like you guys did a really good job. The book's amazing. As someone who's not super into this stuff, like I really enjoyed the book. And I was just we were at a friend's house last night. I was just talking to them about the book and, if it's something they're interested in. It's because it isn't like, it's not fiction. It's like, here are these things, here are real problems, here are real issues, and it's also funny, like I said. So thanks for coming on the podcast. This is awesome. I feel honored that you want to come on here and talk about it. I tried my hardest to get us, good questions because I'm sure you've been interviewed by a lot of people. So I don't want to feel like, so tell me about your book, that kind of stuff. So
no, this was awesome. And to be honest, a lot of our interviews, it was clear they hadn't read the book. Like they read, like the back of the book has a series of questions like, what would it be like to use the restroom in space? What would it be like? And one interview literally just went through the questions on the back of the book. I was like, you didn't. And so anyway, to be interviewed by someone who read the book, and it's so much fun talking to you. I'm honored you invited me back. I had a lot of fun. Thank you.
Well, good. Yeah, thank you. And we'll be talking because I think there'd be other people that would want to be interested in those stories that didn't make the cut. So. Oh,
perfect. That sounds great. We'll chat about them in the new year.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kelly.
Yep. Thanks, Lorenzo.
Thanks again to my guest, Kelly Weinersmith, for coming on the podcast to talk about her and her husband, Zach Weinersmith's book, A City on Mars. It was a great episode. And hopefully she comes back on to tell us more stories that did not make the cut into the book or for the book. So I'm looking forward to that. So please check the book out. I will put the link in the comments. I guess the easiest thing to do is put the Amazon link in there. I got it on through Audible, so that was good. Good to listen to. But please check the book out. Again, it's called A City on Mars. So thanks to Kelly for coming on the podcast. Thanks to all of you for always liking, sharing, reviewing, subscribing to the podcast, commenting, emailing, sharing notes, that kind of stuff. Any interaction is good interaction. So thank you all for doing that. Continue to share it, everybody. Continue to share your favorite episode or the podcast in general, so other people can find it. If you want to come on the podcast or know someone that would be a good guest, email thenerdballpodcast@gmail.com. That's it. I hope everyone had a good new year. I know it's a couple weeks past that. Looking forward to 2024. And as always, thanks to Real JP Multimedia, Cuttlefish Graphics, Big Daddy Graphics, and Perrysburg Junior High STEM Lab for always helping out the podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.